Hey tribe, it's Ritah The Thought and welcome to Talk Thoughts. I hope you guys enjoy the conversation. Follow Ritah The Thought on Instagram to
Hey,
keep updated.
can
Can
you
you
hear
hear me?
me?
I can.
You can't hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. I don't hear an echo. So
You don't
fingers
hear an
crossed.
echo as well. Fingers crossed too. All
You
right.
know,
So
I laugh about things like this, Rita, that the universe is like throwing everything at you, and you're just like, you know what? I'm just gonna go with it all, and hope for the best. Uh,
yes, let's hope for the best. I
yeah,
hope everybody can hear us well now.
yeah,
Okay, if
and
you guys
thanks to
can hear
every.
us well, just put it in the comments if you can hear us well, and if you still have a problem, do tell us as well. But other than that, I think from now on we'll just continue with the talk, and then it's being recorded, and we'll
Yeah,
put it on our GTV.
yeah, sounds good. Yeah, so I laugh, just laugh it off, and I appreciate everybody hopping back on now that they can hopefully hear us
Yes,
a little bit
you
better.
know.
Yeah, technology is like, it helps us out, but it's also like the devil, right? Like it completely
No.
destroys. Like I've been on so many Zoom calls, like, can you hear me? Hello, hello. And you're like, you know what? Whatever, just go with it.
Whatever.
Yeah,
But it seems everybody can hear us well now, so that's
yeah,
good. Yeah.
yeah.
All right. So where were we? We were talking about how
Yeah, I remember before the echo, right? I think we were talking about why Africans feel a certain way and why African Americans feel a certain way when it comes to Black Lives Matter and issues like that. So
yes.
before all of that, so it was basically, I think, starts with education. We haven't
Right.
had an opportunity in America to learn about, one, our own legacies and our own history, but also just learning in general about Africa.
Mm,
Everything that I personally learned about the African continent has been because I went out of my way to do so.
right.
I studied it. I love the work. I love learning. I love anthropology. So I went and did that work myself. But if I
Mm,
depended on the US education system, whether it's in primary school when you're a child
mm,
or when you are a college student, all the way up to even when you're getting a PhD, it's much
mm,
more difficult to acquire that information,
right.
especially if you don't have that income to say, I'm just going to go to Ghana today and just find out more information. Most people
Mm,
don't have that level of income, or not just even income, but they don't have the knowledge to know how to even do that, right? Where to start to travel abroad, and you've never been abroad.
right.
So with that, our understanding as a country regarding African people is really based on what we see in the news.
No.
We see everything that's negative. We see war, we see poverty, we see terrorism, whatever's of the news today. But the good things that come out of Africa, the cultural things, the beautiful things, the
Mm,
people who are leaders in the African continent are not talked about. And so that's a huge issue that I literally just had this, and I wish he would have joined, but I think he's a teacher, so he's working. I just had this conversation in my Instagram chat, my friend that said, I was really misinformed about Africa. And
mm,
I really thought Africans hated us. I mean, this is literally a guy who has a college education. He's well educated, but he really thought that Africans just generally hate at Black people in the United States. I've never felt that
wow.
way. But there are a lot of people who feel that way because the Africans that you do interact with in the United States come sometimes with judgment, and they don't
Right.
understand that whatever, and I can't speak, and maybe you can answer that for me, Rita. Whatever you guys are consuming about African American people, and in your countries, is not necessarily always the truth as well, right? It's
Mm,
been filtered out. It's been, taken out of context. There's not a lot of historical knowledge or facts and figures to really help put the dots together. I think that
mm,
has changed a lot with social media because of what's going on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And so we can
mm,
see our lives more clearly, and we can see our lives much more interconnected than ever before. And so I think
right.
some of those barriers are breaking down. But
Right.
for a long time, I studied international affairs, and when I talked about Africa, I had to go out of my way to tell Black people, especially, but also white people and other people of other races, that
Mm,
this is not the real narrative, and that this narrative has been created by years and years of westernized perspective regarding not just Black people, but Africans.
Yeah. You know, you bring out a very important point, really. As Africans, we also feel like Black Americans or Black people in, you know, that are beyond Africa don't necessarily care or are ignorant to issues to do with the issues that happen in Africa. Like, say, for instance, the corruption. Take, for instance, you spoke about identity, and we're wondering, do you want to know your identity, actually? Are you interested? Are you interested in the economics of here? Are you interested in protesting and talking about where you supposedly come from? Are you interested in looking for your DNA? I understand there are new technologies around, you know, figuring out your DNA and how far you come from and all that, and what percentage is African, what percentage is American, what percentage is what, and all that hullabaloo, you know.
Yeah.
And if that technology is there, if you can do that, if you have access to that, then why don't you do so? We already we suffer from our own relatives and our own friends leaving Africa to come there because they think that that side is greener pastures.
Yeah.
That side is better. Not because, like you said, the media. At the end of the day, we think besides the protests and all that, people are ambitious, and they think that it's going to be easier to make money. It's going to be easier. It's better to hustle that side than a hustle here where you don't necessarily see where your money is going, where you don't necessarily see how your legacy is growing. But at the end of the day, if you are so pressed, that side, concerning things to do with racial discrimination, police brutality, and all that, why then do you not make the effort to get to know where you supposedly come from? And if anything, come invest here. Come to your home country and invest. Come to your home continent and see where you fit in at the end of the day. If it's overpopulated that side, come and let's figure out, because we're very communal. I mean, we are very communal. But we know everybody from everywhere, and our family is so extended, you know, and so big, like, it doesn't just cut off from 2, 3, 4 families and that's it. It's everybody. So that's the perspective for me and for the few people that I've had the conversations with. And there are also there's also the notion that says, why should we be concerned about brutalities and everything that's happening on that side when there's also Black on Black violence, when there's also African on African violence, when there's also issues that have got to do with us as Black people that are not dealt with. And so if it's like that, why don't Black Americans, Black Europeans, Black people from other countries also get into that, get onto that bandwagon? Because when Black Lives Matter comes up, and there are issues to do with that, all the way here in Africa, we are on it. We're talking about it. We're like, yeah, Black Lives Matter. Oh my God, there's this guy who was just shot dead. We know about it. Yeah. But are you also privy of Africans who are being abducted, slavery that's happening in here, that are being raped, women that are being raped, women that are being murdered, men that are being taking their livelihoods away from them, you know? The minimum wage in Zimbabwe, if you convert it to US dollars, is almost like $2, $1 or $2.
Yeah.
If you convert it to US dollars, and yet when we transact in Zimbabwe, you're transacting in either the Zimbabwean currency or in US dollars, and everything is like, it has to make sense, but it doesn't make sense because you're earning $1. So are African Americans privy of that? Are Black Europeans privy of that? Are other Africans in other continents privy of that? And what are they going to do about it as well concerning us Africans? Because we can talk about you. We can have Blackout Tuesday on our phone.
Yeah, for sure.
And all that. But what about you?
I think the question for many African Americans is the how. I don't think it's the desire. So I definitely hear everything you're saying, Rita. And you've made a couple points that I want to say. Is the first thing is that a lot of it is access. A lot of Black people in America do not have access, right? Still to this day, most African American people do not have access to internet. They do not have access to laptops. We talk about systematic racism. We always talk about police brutality, but it's systems, right? It's not just a matter of this is one issue, Black Lives Matter, and it's the police suck. It's also that Black people don't have education systems that allow them to even know where to begin. So let's just start from the beginning. If you're a child, and I'm living in New Orleans, Louisiana, which is a majority African American city, where 60% of the population is here, but 30% of that 60% of Black people are living below or at the poverty line, right? So if they're living at this poverty line, they do not have access to internet. This was actually a recent issue, Rita, with COVID, because now kids have to learn from home. And the schools actually had to provide the children with laptops and internet because they don't actually have them. If they don't go to school, children don't have access to internet. They don't have access.
Have the same issue.
Yeah, so that's what we're saying. So if you imagine we have the same issue, how is a family living in poverty or, basically making ends meet supposed to then say, I'm surviving this world, I'm trying to hustle, and then let me go out and try to find a relationship with someone in Africa that I've never met. So I think the issue is, one, getting that outreach to our children and to our families in inner cities, particularly in the South, that don't have relationships. Like, I wouldn't have met you, Rita, if it wasn't for Lakedra, because Lakedra helped, really connect the dots between us because she's living in Africa now. She made that leap. And so we need more people of color, or really Black people, but also Africans, to say, look, let me make a friend with someone in America. Let me make a friend with someone. I see someone says Detroit. Let me make a friend with someone in California. Let me make a friend with somebody in Atlanta or whatever you're at, because we don't have those connections to know where to begin. And so that's the first big issue. Two, I can tell you there's a lot of Black people that would move to Africa tomorrow. Actually, I would probably be one of those people. I absolutely love Africa. I don't, even the whole dollar rate thing doesn't mean anything to me, because I think it's about having as you mentioned, Rita, it's about that community. But I think, like I said, my friend who I spoke to yesterday said, I don't know where to go. I don't know who to talk to about opening up a business in Africa. I don't know. I don't have any friends there. What if they're not nice to me? What if I don't speak the language? There's a lot of things that I hear about Africa, all these what ifs. Well, what if? And so there needs to be more conversations like what we're doing, Rita, to let people know that it's okay to say, you know what? Put your hands up and say, I want to move to this particular country and start fresh. And getting over that fear, because it's also about comfort level, right? Like I'm in New Orleans. I know my city. I love my city. It's a connection to the land. Like you guys have a connection to your land. That's connecting us. And then you mentioned something about ancestors. I'm going to tell you, I just had this conversation with my girlfriends. I said, I want to do my African ancestry. It cost, I think, $600 to do that. For me to look up my family or my ancestry in Africa, particularly, because there's some DNA sites that do it. Just generally, they'll say, oh, 80% of you comes from Africa, but they won't say exactly where. They won't say the tribe. They won't say the community. They will literally just say you're from Africa, and then 10% of you is from Europe, and good luck. And so in order for me to get that detail, $600 is like the starting rate.
Right.
And most people can't afford that. I could afford it, but I'm like, well, geez, that's super expensive to me. When the other one, I think it's 23andMe, is like $70 flat rate. So there's a lot of that involved in why we as Black people in America don't really make those connections. And we have to, again, this is a lack of education. When people came here and they became slaves, they took away their names, they took away their continent, they took away their history. So there's only some plantations where people became slaves actually kept a roster of their slaves, but they didn't always put, okay, well, I got this person from this country. They'll just say, we renamed him Bob and we bought Bob for $1,000, right? And that's all you have. So my last name is Dandridge. I don't really know where my last name comes from. I don't know.
I was having the same conversation with my mom in the morning, and we spoke about things. We spoke about it. Okay, half the people, or at least everybody that I know who's African American, does not even hold an African name.
No, no.
And I agree with you that because of that slave system where you were branded, your identity was taken away and all that, and then you became someone completely different.
Yeah.
And not only does that make you different in terms of your name and all that, it makes you different in your culture, in your mannerisms, in everything, you know. And so I guess it's also on us to understand that, you know what, it's not just about the things that are on the surface and, you know, the media frenzy and, you know, it's everything. It's how damaged, not only psychologically, but emotionally and mentally and everything that we all are, especially those that are products of slavery. A friend also brought up, let's just get into this a little bit. A friend also brought up the issue to deal with the one drop.
Yes,
theory.
that's the thing. Yeah, it's a very hot topic thing.
Yeah, so what is your take on the one drop theory? What on the one drop stance?
It's heavy. So I have a theory on one drop. One, it was real, right? So going back to that slave book, right? So you came here, I have to use that as context. So you came here on a boat without your choice. You were bought and sold at a market as you would a cattle or a chicken. And then you're taken there, you were stripped of your name, and your last name was your slave owner's last name. Yeah. So let's just say I'm a woman and then my slave master rapes me and I have his baby, which often happened. Then that slave child, right, that is half white and half black is still black, right? Because if they weren't black, then they would be assumed to be free or white, right? And that was against the slave system. The slave system wanted everybody to have any drop of black blood to stay black, because that means that you can continue to enslave and oppress them. Because that happened very often. So white men knew if I could go rape as many slaves as I want without having any question of it. But if I had 50 kids on this plantation, all of a sudden I got 50 kids who want to call themselves white and have access to my assets, right? To my plantation, to my fields, to my cars and whatever. And that's the problem. And that's why the one drop rule exists. So to this day, in America, the system still exists. So if you're African American, obviously, if you have long lineage of that blood, you're black. But even if you're mixed race, you're considered black, right? And it literally there's a term called quadroon, where you can have to go literally 3 times white before you're even considered to be white or white passing. Wow. So you would have to say, for instance, I would have to literally have a child with a white man, and then my child has to marry a white man and have a child, and then he or she would have to have another child before that child would be considered white. And that, again, is a form of oppression, because during slavery, black people outnumbered white people by 3 times, right? Because at this point, you're one slave owner and you have 500 slaves on your plantation. You know, all of a sudden, if you really start letting black people buy their freedom and by their access, then all of a sudden now that they're going to be equal to you. And that wasn't really the goal. The other thing I want to say, though, is blackness is changing, right? If we look at blackness 50 years ago or even 100 years ago, it was very much black and white. Now we have lots of mixed race people, but not just mixed race with black and white. You have black people marrying and having children with Asians and Latinos. America is really a melting pot when it comes to the access of other races, right? So then there's another question of blackness. And that's another thing that we have to talk about, because to be black in America, in my opinion, and people on here may disagree, and I'd love to know what they think, is that it's not necessarily about your complexion or your proximity to blackness anymore. I think it's about your proximity to the struggle and your proximity to your understanding or your experience in the United States in particular. Right, because there are a lot of people who they call it white passing, where they're black and they can pass anywhere and people think that they're white. But I think that those people don't have the experience as a black person. I can go out, I can be, harassed by a police officer. I can be, have microaggressions in my office. But I know a lot of white passing people, they don't have those same issues. They don't have, for example, do you guys know who Doja Cat is? She's like a recent, like a rapper. Her father, I believe, is African. I don't know from what country. And her mother is white Jewish. I think she may be South African. And she is white passing. If you look at her, she doesn't necessarily look Black. And so her experiences do not reflect Blackness. So Blackness is now really a proximity to your understanding of the plight and the struggle of Black people, and also understanding that, you know, I may not look Black, or I may not, in New Orleans we may say talk Black, but I identify and I feel the struggle of what other people are going through. So in America, it's constantly changing, especially now because we have much more globalization and people are coming here, they're intermarrying, they're interdating and so forth. So I don't know if does that like reflect what you think, Ritah, but that's my perspective, is that it's not a monolith anymore. It was a monolith 100 years ago, even 50 years ago, right? Where you were Black, you lived in the South, these were your experiences. Segregation made it so that Blackness was one size fits all. If you even have, they used to say the brown paper bag test, if you didn't pass that test, in the sense that you were too dark and you look like you were Black, you can't go into this restaurant. You couldn't go sit into this place. You couldn't drink from this water fountain. So Blackness was much more literally and figuratively Black and white. With desegregation in the 60s, that has changed. And in that same sense, it has also changed how Black people view themselves as a people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is very interesting. Like, yes, Menzo Maseko says Blackness is changing, and that's a very important point. And I also thought that was a very important point in the fact that we know Black in Africa. Yeah. It's the few, like unlike the majority here in Africa is Black.
Right.
And the minority is white. Like there are a lot of I don't know any white person who stays in my community. I know they are there.
Yeah.
I know they're there, but I think I've seen one, and they were in their car and they were dropping off somebody and they drove off so fast. But
so they drove off like immediately. Oh, I'm in the wrong place.
That was the only white person that I've seen. And I was actually waving down transport. I needed transport to get into town because I live 20 Ks out of town.
Okay.
And so I was waving down cars, and they just passed. Then they dropped off somebody. I'm like, but I'm going the same direction. Just give me a lift or something. But I do understand what you're talking about, that Blackness is changing, maybe in the perspective of you guys. We know majority of us are Black.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, if we can do a survey, I think we'll do a survey. I've met a lot of women in Africa who say, no, I want to get married to a white person. I want to get married to, and I'm like, I'm guilty of that. Like at some point I was like, I want to get married to a white person. And then I'm like, but what's wrong with my chocolate brothers? You know. Yeah. But then you also, but then you also have the mindset where you're like, you know what, we're living in the 21st century. Of course, there are things that are happening that are bad, and there are things that we can't change necessarily. Well, they can be changed, but that we can't change at the wink of an eye right now. But we speak of Ubuntu when it comes to Africa. We speak of Ubuntu and unity, like it's all us. And so I had a discussion recently where I'm in a group with people that are white and people that are Black. And someone was saying, no, you're going to offend the white people, because I posed a similar question. And I was like, no. If you're white, boy or girl, and you are living in an African society, and if you don't see the ills of the African society, then you've got a problem. If you deem yourself an African in Africa and still have your white color, you know exactly what's happening to Africans. You know exactly what's happening to Black people. And don't allow the bad stuff to happen to them whilst you look. Be the change then, if that is it. But anyway, we're digressing furthermore into what we're talking about.
I hear all of that. And I think what's interesting too is that a lot of white people in America will not admit it, but they have Black blood in them too. Right. And that's what we get to that white passing, right? And so you have all these divisions now of Blackness and saying, well, I'm part Black and I don't experience racism, or I don't, because you're not in proximity to those issues, or your complexion allows you to pass away from those issues. So it's very, very, I would be honest, it's a toxic environment, right? Because that I really appreciate about when I was in Africa, that, you know, we're only 13% of the population in America, right? To think that you think out of 100, you know, all the people in America, we're only 13% of that self-identified Black, right? Because there's a whole nother thing of you may be Black and not identify as it. Then you have the country still majority white. It's still 40% or little, it's getting lower, but it's about 50% between 40 and 50 now of white people. So imagine we don't get a chance to say, I'm in an only Black community. I have never had that experience, Ritah, to say, like, I don't have to be prepared to see a white person in my proximity. I know that no matter where I go in America, I have to learn how to work with white people, to live through the experiences, to live through negative comments like, oh, you know, Black people, y'all are more violent, right? Like, I've had so many ignorant comments. I've been called the N-word multiple times in my lifetime, and having to not only deal with that stress. To
hold you on that, what is it about being called nigger?
So
Black people don't want to hear?
Nigger is.
I do understand the whole historical background behind the title, because I don't want to call it a name, behind the title, but we do it to ourselves too.
Yeah,
we call ourselves niggas, and you know, and how
it's an interesting thing in the United States. And so what you know the history that was basically an oppressive word, and it was used to dehumanize Black people, right? In the 1950s and 1960s, Black people started to retake their Blackness, right? And that was the first process of saying, look, I am Black, the Black and I'm proud, right? The James Brown song, all of those things started coming out. And one thing that came out of that was nigga, is that we're going to take that word back, right? As a word of unification. Because again, these things didn't exist.
It was a conditioning.
It was conditioning. So we're unconditioning that word as a term of oppression, and taking that word as a term of brotherhood. So that's why we say, that's right, my nigga, or that's here, my, all of that is just literally you're taking those terms and you're reframing them to create a brotherhood, because we don't have what you have, Ritah, like we talked about. We don't have communities that say, or words or language that is ours, right? We don't get to say, I speak this particular language and white people can't understand what I'm saying. They always know what I'm saying because we only know English in the United States, unless you're lucky enough to take foreign language classes. So in order to create a unity or some type of community, we then say, that's my nigga, this my nigga, you know, whatever. And then that word has evolved as well, right? Now it's in every hip hop song. They got white people who say it. They shouldn't be saying it. And why they shouldn't be saying it is because of what I just said. It's not for you, right? We took that word back from slave owners, from those who oppressed us, and we created this word for our brotherhood or sisterhood. Right. And you may agree on saying it or not saying it, but the reason why it exists is because we don't get to have a language of our own. Right. When Black people, we have Black dialect, we are demoralized for speaking a certain kind of way. You know, when we always say you have this quote, I don't know if you heard the term before, code switch. But when we talk to our Black brothers and sisters, we have a different way of talking. Like, yeah, girl, you know, that's what I'm talking about. You know, but when we're white people, yes, sir. And we have to speak a certain way, because if we don't, then we are going to be assumed to be uneducated, to be less effective at work or whatever we're doing. So the N-word was another way of co-opting that and saying we have our own language. And so hip hop was just a reflection of that new language of Black people, to say, like, we are empowering one another through our own way of speaking, through our own language. And lo and behold, like everything Black people do in the United States became popular, and it became consumed by white people. And they then said, well, I'm just going to say the N-word because, you know, Lil Baby, the Baby, Drake, whoever says the word, and make it acceptable, but it's not acceptable. So it's a one of those things that's a gray area or a nuance, but that's pretty much the whole point of nigga, or the N-word, as you would say.
All right. There's a question here by Menzi, who says, beyond colorism or matters of pigmentation, how do you deal with the structural oppression of Black people by other Black people who are mimicking the oppression inherited from racists? And my question to you behind that, first of all, is do you have that? Do you have structural oppression by Black people on other Black people in your setting?
Absolutely. Yes. That is very common and very strong. So the same things, the same structures you guys have in Africa, we have here. It just looks different, right? So colorism, remember we talked about in the beginning of that one drop rule, right?
Yeah.
Or you can be a quadroon and you can have three, 1/3 of that blood. So if you were lighter skinned or white passing, you have access to more things, more education than others would have, right? I think somebody in the chat mentioned W. Du Bois. He was a fair skinned Black man, right? Booker T. Washington was a fair skinned Black man. Rosa Parks was fair skinned. Even Malcolm X was fair skinned, right? So if you look at the leadership of Black people, they have all been brown to lighter complected in our leadership roles, right? And that's not a mistake. It's because they have more access to things that white people allow them to have. Like, oh, you're, for some reason, and that goes back to oppression, that white people think if you're a certain complexion, then you have more access, you're more intelligent, you're less of a nigga, right? You're just somehow a little bit more, like me. Right. And that has nothing to do with complexion. And so that has spilled over into the Black community. I am, my family's Creole. And Mike, if you notice, I'm not dark skinned. I have a lighter complexion. And that is because my family is mixed. I'm from New Orleans, so it's a bit of a long story. I don't want to get into it. But basically, to be Creole, you're mixed with either French or Spanish colonial blood from way back in the 1800s, right? And so if you were Creole descent, you had more access to things. You had more access to education. You had more access to buying land. You could buy your freedom, or you can buy other people's freedom. I think somebody said less threatening. You're less threatening, right? And then those who are dark-skinned were relegated to the back of the line, literally and figuratively, by Black people themselves, right? It's also about power complexes, because now that when lighter-skinned Black people in the United States said, oh, I get it, white people accept me if I look like this and if I act like this, then it's also about, well, I'm going to use this to power play or oppress my own people in order for me to get up, right? That crabs in a bucket mentality is saying we all are suffering, but I know I can get up higher to that to get out of this bucket before you can, just because of the complexion of your skin. So colorism is 100% real. I've had a lot of people, I'm not like that, but I've had a lot of people assume that because of my complexion, oh, you're like this. I mean, I've literally had one of my really good friends, we're best friends now, and she's darker complected, and she said to me when we first met, I thought you were a bitch because of the way you looked, right? Because my hair is not kinky and my complexion of my skin, I'm like, I'm not even like that. And now she said, I'm so sorry, but like, that's what colorism does to us, right? One of my friends, Diari, she's actually from Senegal. And we talked about Beyonce, and she's like, I hate Beyonce. I'm like, how could you hate Beyonce? Like, my heart sank. And she's like, I hate Beyonce because she, to me, is a symbol of colorism. And, she's a dark-skinned Black girl, and she's like, I don't have big curves, and I don't have a big butt, and I'm dark-skinned. And I see her as the antithesis to my level or my access to love from people, whether it's men or white people or even Black people. And to think that way, I haven't had that experience. So I know I have a level of privilege to say I've never felt unloved or not beautiful. And to think my friend Diara, who I think is gorgeous, felt that way, meant to me that we have some serious issues in the United States that we haven't dealt with, right? Because most of our singers, if you haven't noticed, Rita, most of the popular, particularly women, they're light-skinned, right? Rihanna's fair-skinned, obviously Beyonce, her sister Solange. So hopefully this narrative changes, but it's ever constant in our society. The ones who make it generally are lighter skinned people.
All right. That is very sad. That is good, but I understand. But there's also a sadness to that, where you look at another Black person and you see them as an advantage to you, like what you're talking about, Beyonce and stuff like that, and a lot of people actually do look up to, public figures like that. Because you also have a lot of Africans who will look at Beyonce and be like, oh my God, I want to be like Beyonce. I want to be a great artist like Beyonce and all that stuff. And it's so sad to have people who think that way. But it does happen. And it is like that. So my
Yeah.
question is, do you identify as an African? Do you call
As an
yourself an
African,
African American?
I identify as an African American because, like we talked about, I would love to identify as African, but I don't because I don't. My experience is that I don't have that access to my ancestry. If someone, I would feel embarrassed, Reed. If an African person came up to me and I say, "Oh, I'm African," and they're like, "Where are you from? What country? What tribe? What is your language?" and they start speaking to me in Swahili, I'm gonna be like, I can't answer any of those questions. So
Mm-hmm.
we're forced as African American people to identify as African American because, again, all of that information about ourselves has been erased. So I have to be African American. I was forced into this, and this is the system I live in. And I think hopefully, as more Black people have an opportunity to move to another country in Africa, then we can then say, like, I feel like I'm part of this. But it's always going to be a part of African American people that we're never going to get back, right? Even friends I know who've done African ancestry and they've paid the $600 to do it, they say it still doesn't make you feel whole. It just still doesn't make you feel complete because I had a friend who did a pilgrimage. They found out their family members were from Ghana. They went all the way over there and they said, this is great, but I still don't know who my family is. And no one in Africa said, come and be a part of my tribe. It doesn't work that way, right? Come be a part of my family. We aren't welcome with open arms in Africa for understandable reasons, right? You guys have family ties, you have family units that we don't have. So our unit and our family is the people that we have in our communities here in America. Not to mention there are cultural things too, Rita, right? Our food, our music, our traditions are uniquely African American, right? You couldn't find those things in other parts of the world or even in Africa. So I would always identify as African American out of one respect, because I don't want to go around just saying I'm yelling random things about Africa and that's not true. But also I don't have that opportunity to say, I know exactly where my family's from. I know exactly what language they spoke. I know exactly their traditions or the clothing or any of that. But I think there is a positive light in this, Rita, that a lot of people, Black people in America, are now saying to themselves, you know what, I want to do more. And I've noticed a lot more Black people choosing to travel to Africa, choosing to learn more about African history, wearing more African garb to say, you know what, I feel like this is a connection to my history and my ancestry. But there's always going to be this gray area that exists. No matter, when I have children, my children have children, that my ancestors don't know who they were, or they were removed totally from what they were. And if they didn't, they were killed, abused for speaking their own language, for wearing their traditional clothes. So, and it's a heavy weight, though. I think a lot of Black people feel that way, that they want to be connected, but they don't know how.
Let me tell you this. I think there are certain things that are going to be hard to fix. Like, take for instance, you're talking about how figuring out where you come from, exactly, the tribe, etc., and all that. But let me just tell you this. As Africans, like I said earlier, we are very communal.
Yeah.
And not only are we communal in respect of just our direct blood, but also adoptive blood, where as a friend, you could actually become family. You understand what I'm trying to say? That is, for us, that's unity. There's a level of it, of course. Like, there's a level of, oh, okay, so this person is actually really my friend, and now they are part of my family and stuff like that. And of course, like the marrying, intermarriage, and stuff like that. But I believe that maybe now is an opportunity for us. Like, it just dawned on me just now. Like, maybe now is an opportunity for us to come up with a system, even a pen pal, like the old pen pal system. Let's do the whole pen pal system and say, you know what, this is for Africans and African Americans or Black people who are outside of Africa who want to reconnect with their African heritage. Because at the end of the day, like you said, there's a gray area. There is no way, or it's going to be so difficult for you to figure out what tribe exactly you came from.
I love that,
exactly that you came from. So maybe let's do a pen pal system. Let's create friendships amongst ourselves, and say, you know what, I want you to be my friend. And then create avenues and ways where we can travel to each other and, connect with each other so that maybe you could learn
Yeah.
fully about Africa. Be in Africa. Come to Africa and integrate yourself within. Like you said, you study, you've got a certain level of study of anthropology. And I find that very fascinating because I also did that. And that's what also kind of drew me to being fascinated by cultures and other, because as an African as well, believe you me when I say, I also don't know everything about Black people. Also don't know everything about the cultures and the tribes and other continents. I've been to a couple of African countries, and the vast majority of it, I've never been there. But we can always work something out when it comes to identifying who we are. We need to, let's just create friendships. Let's start there and create friendship and say, you know what, I'm your friend, or can you please be my friend? And let's know each other, integrate into each other. And then we can talk about the economics. We can talk about how you can then get a business. We can talk about how then you can relocate. We can talk about how that is, if it is necessary, if that is what you want at the end of the day. Because you also don't want to have a culture shock. You don't want to have a all of that, like you come here and you can't speak in certain languages, and then I start talking in Shona, take for instance, in Jide. That is quite uncomfortable. But at the same time, on the issue of language, we speak English.
Yeah.
We try to speak English as fluently as we can. We get it from media, we get it from school, we get it from everywhere. And so maybe now also it's time for you guys then to say, you know what, consciously and decisively, we're gonna learn Bantu languages. We're gonna learn African languages. Come and learn Zulu, learn Shona, learn Swahili, learn whatever. Because apparently Swahili is the most common and most popular language because of the Lion King. Because of
It's very popular, yes.
But there are a lot of other Venda. Come and pick a language and say, you know what, I want to learn this language. And believe you me, most of them are intertwined. Once you learn one language, it's going to be so interesting, and then you're going to start learning the other one. And next thing you're speaking 2 or 3 languages that you can end up, communicating with when you're in Africa. But like I'm saying, maybe it's time to take the veil off of all of us, Africans and Africans in that are not in Africa, in America and Europe, and consciously make the decision that no, we want to learn the truth. We want to learn the truth about Africa. We want to learn the truth about our culture, about our traditions, about our heritage, not specific to one tribe or one whatever, but just to know so that you can identify, you can be like, oh, I like this. It resonates with me. We are spiritual beings at the end of the day, and you will find something that resonates with your spirit. And once you find that thing that resonates with your spirit, work with it. Even if it means that. Yes?
I was going to say, I think that's a wonderful idea. Actually, I think me and Lakedra talked about creating a pen pal system many years ago. We never actually did it. So maybe this is a way to move forward. Yeah, because I think that's a lot of Black people want to know more about Africa. We don't have access to it as easily. And again, we don't know where to begin. So if you create a pen pal and said, hey, these are the things I'm doing in my community, and share pictures and share culture and share whatever you guys want to do, I think that whole world is going to open up for a lot of people. A lot of Black people here yearn for that type of relationship, right? It's not that we're like, whatever, who cares? There are some people who do that, but the majority of the Black people I know want that relationship. They want to really go to Africa. They want to learn. They want to be with their people, and they just don't know where to begin. And I think that if we can create that, then more Black people would open up businesses and actually move to Africa as well. A lot of Black people here always say, if I could leave, I would leave, right? I want to leave because it's oppressive and it's a lot of work to try to fight racism every day, all day, right? And it's literally, it's killing us on all levels, right? Mentally, physically, and obviously police brutality. So
I think
we need to do.
I think we need a new focus. I think we need a new focus. We need a new focus where because we feed off what we put our mind to. And if we continue feeding on the aspects of oppression, racism, all that stuff, that's what we get back. What we feed is what we get back. The energy that we harness is what we get back. So now maybe it's time for African Americans to consciously make a decision and be like, you know what, I want to work on the aspect that actually makes me what they say I am. Like you said earlier, you spoke about how you took the nigger word back and said, you know what, this is ours now, and we are positively changing the narrative behind it.
Yeah.
So now maybe it's time to also take the African part and say, you know what, we are making a change in our lives, and we want to actually identify as that what which we call ourselves, or that which you call us, Black people, African people. It's all over the media. It's all over the news. Where it's all like African American, Black American, African. And all right, okay, fine. So if that is what it is, so that we don't have this whole thing going on, because we need peace. We need peace. We need peace. Let's
I was gonna say,
what we need to work on.
We have to work on that.
But
there's one caveat though I want to say though, Ritah, is that we're still living in an oppressive system, right? So we have to find avenues that will allow us to teach or allow us to learn this type of history or create these type of relationships. So I went to, for example, I went to an HBCU, which is historically Black college and university. Those were created out of segregation, where Black people were only allowed to go to these schools and only allowed to learn in these institutions. We couldn't go to a PWI, which means predominantly white institution. So creating those avenues in HBCUs is probably the safest and first place to go. But like you mentioned earlier about the languages, there's no one teaching African languages I've seen one Swahili class in my whole life on 30 years on this earth in the United States. So because it's, again, African culture is not deemed important, right? We live in the United States. You can always find a French class. You can always find a Spanish class. You can find German. Right? You can literally find Russian classes, but you cannot find any African language classes. The closest thing you can get to that is, again, like probably Arabic. I learned Arabic in college because that's the closest thing I can get to, right? But when you talk about learning Swahili or Zulu or any of that, it's hard to find. And it's like literally a niche. And I remember one school I went to, NYU, for a semester, and they offered Swahili. And the next thing you know, they only offered it for one semester. So which means it was probably a traveling professor who was able to come in. So I agree with you. And I think we need more Africans. The Africans that come, you may want to focus on your career. You may want to be an entrepreneur. But the best thing I could say Africans could do is teach. Right? Because I know I live in New York City. There's tons of Africans in New York City. They're all doing all kinds of things. But I would love to see, you can focus on your career, but if you just want to do a side hustle and say, look, I want to teach my language, I want to teach my culture, and go to these universities, public universities, and say, this is what I want to do and offer it. Because as Black people, we don't really have access to that, right? We want to do it, but there's nobody offering it to us to say this is an opportunity for you. Even in my HBCU, Ritah, the only classes I can learn, foreign language classes, was French, Spanish, and Arabic. That was it. Yeah. So we need to also see I agree with you on that, but we also need to see Africans who come here and say, look, here, I'm offering it to you. Or have online classes. It's
not a problem there only, because we also have a struggle where in our own institutions, we don't learn our Bantu languages. It's only now. I think recently, an African language was actually introduced, being Ndebele. Otherwise, you were doing English and Shona. Shona is the language that we all speak, but there was also like, okay, fine. We are learning Shona in school, but that's not like the only African language that is there, really. And then they introduced Ndebele. Okay, fine. So there's somebody who says that addressed our question. Which question? Let me just go back. Okay, so but Africa does have division with tribes and class. What are your thoughts on that? Yes, Africa does have division with tribes and class. I mean, that happens everywhere. I think it's all over the continent. It's all over the world. Everything. There always will be tribes and classes. We do have tribes. People are different at the end of the day. Like we said, there are Shona people, there are Karanga, there are Shona people, there are Ndebele people, there are Zulu people, there are Swahili, and all that. We have borders of course, they came through colonization, where now we've got a whole map that is demarcated and all that stuff, like the scramble for Africa, the partitioning of Africa and all that. So yes, there has been a division, and traveling between places hasn't been as easy, really, because of the border system and all that. So we do have division with tribes and class. And the harder you work, of course, because at the end of the day, through colonization, most of the institutions that we are actually running through were established by colonialism. So the law that we use, the justice system that we use, the educational system that we use, all of that came through colonization. And so class will definitely be created, because if not everybody is able to go to school. And that is a fact. And if I can go to school and I can better my life, or I can fight through it and better my life, and another person can't do that, that there's already a difference in classes. I'm already going to be in a higher class than they are. And tribes will always be there. Tribes will never change. They will always be there. Even before colonialism, there were tribes. So
it's always there. And I want to also say, back to the beginning, and maybe this is when we were having audio issues, is that's what we don't need to talk about, right? Because what African Americans know about Africa is tribal division. And that's why a lot of Black people are like, oh, I don't think I'm going to go there, because if they don't accept each other, then they're not going to accept me, or I'm going to get caught in the crossfire. I mean, think about the movies that we watch. I mean, one of the most popular movies about Africa is, I believe it's Hotel Rwanda, right? About the Rwandan genocide, right? That's what you learn about in school. When you learn about Africa, you learn about genocide, you learn about terrorism, you learn about poverty, you learn about children dying of illnesses and Ebola and HIV/AIDS, and all of that is what we're consuming. And we never have an opportunity to say, you know what, I didn't learn any of the good things. I didn't learn the cultural things, the traditional things. And so I would even say, I know the person, he's like saying, I hear what he's saying about all this division, but there's division everywhere in the world. Asian people have tribal divisions. Europeans, as you know, the EU fights all day long, right? But we don't talk about France fighting with the United Kingdom, or Germany fighting with Russia. So we need to really focus more so on the positive things that Africa has to offer, because we already know all the negative. We already know the tribal problems. We don't need to talk about that anymore. That's accessible to us.
Yeah. So another question says, why would I leave America to go deal with the same thing in a different continent? I just need you to clarify a little bit what you mean by the same thing in a different because, like I said earlier on, tribes are everywhere. And like we're saying, it's not like we hate each other. Do you know, tribes are there. Let me just give you this. In Africa, we have tribal system. We have a totem system. And even names and stuff like that, like different surnames, like everybody, like we have different surnames. And it's about intermarriage, one. We don't believe in marrying your brother or your sister or your cousin or anything. That's taboo.
Yeah.
You marry somebody different. You can't do that. You marry somebody from a different totemage, from a different tribe, and all that. You may come from the same area, like you can come from Harare or you can come from Mashingo, right? But you cannot be of the same totemage, or you cannot be of the same surname, because now we're going to look deeper and see, okay, fine. So your totem is Gumbo, but which Gumbo are you? Because there can be like 2-3 different Gumbos. My Gumbo is probably like a cow's leg. Yes, what I'm trying to say. And then there is also like, okay, sorry, I got a question here. Let me just take it. I just got a question. Let me just take it. Okay. And all that. Sorry, I got lost a little bit there. We can't intermarry. We can't intermarry because we are different at the end of the day. And there's a system that was created so that we don't into other families and stuff like that. And so tribalism will always be there. But we also are dealing with issues of tribalism and how there was also segregation within tribes and stuff like that amongst tribes and blah, blah, blah. But like we're saying, it's amongst everybody. So we have 5 minutes to go before Instagram decides to cut us off. So I'm just going to give you the floor and continue speaking on the questions that I hear and what you think you can answer before we go off, and you can sign off as well.
Yeah, I think the main thing I want to walk away with, and thank you again for inviting me, Ray. This has been a really cool conversation. Hopefully we can do this again. That I would hope that African people, two things that I would hope for is that one, they begin to do a little bit more research and learn about what African Americans go through, right? Because it's a very different experience when you start talking about what slavery was really like. We're not talking about the brushed over version. It was completely inhumane. And all of that is generational trauma that we're carrying as Black people. Like, we can't say this wasn't 50,000 years ago. This was in 400 years, right? We can really trace back this type of trauma to us. So we want more African people to really hear us, not just say hashtag Black Lives Matter and Blackout Tuesday and then go about your day, but really understand there's so many documentaries and books that you can read to really say, you know what, I'm going to learn more about the systems that oppress Black people. But I really liked your idea, Ritah, that I really would hope that when African people do decide to come to America, yeah, you want to come to be a doctor, or you want to come to be an entrepreneur, you want to come to do all that, and that's okay. But take time out of your day to say, you know what, I'm going to try to connect the dots with Black people. Because like I said, when I lived in New York City, which is where most Africans live, they lived on their side and I lived on my side. There was no conversation. I didn't feel always warmed or welcome. Like, this is our space and that's what we're going to do. And that's not okay. So how can we get African people to say, you know what, I'm going to go teach a class at CUNY. I'm going to go try to teach a class at, an HBCU or a university and talk about my tribe, right? I'm going to talk about my language. And say, you know what, do that. Or just work with an organization. I just saw Lakedra. Hey, Kedra, go work with Lakedra, right? Like, there's Black people in Africa who say, we're trying to connect people. And there are opportunities to do that. So, but Black people want to. I can just end that by saying, Ritah, there are a lot of Black people who want to. And some Black people who don't know if they want to because they're afraid of the things. I think the person mentioned tribes and, and tribalism and fear of terrorism. All that needs to be disputed and stopped and talked. We all know it exists, just like it exists in the United States. We have terrorism, we have tribalism, we have colorism. Everybody has that. But how do we talk about the good things? The United States is great at talking about how wonderful it is, right? We're always talking about how wonderful we're doing things, but we don't talk about the bad, right? And with Africa, it's the other way around. They're always talking about the bad things when in the United States and not talking about the good. So I hope that we can flip that narrative and say that Africa is the way of the future, especially for Black people, because I just don't think that this oppressive system is going to end in 2020 because we're all doing hashtag Black Lives Matter. It's just going to be years and years and years of breaking down systems. And not everybody is going to be interested in doing that work, right? And so if you want to find another outlet to connect to your people, I think that there's some good work we can do for sure.
Yeah, true. All right. Yeah. So thank you so much, Jessica. Our time is almost up, but I feel like we have a lot of things that we could actually go on and talk about. So we're gonna plan another one. We're gonna come back in and we can have a conversation and continue these conversations, because clearly a lot of questions are still coming up and people really want to know exactly what's going on between us as Africans and African Americans. So thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Krillin. Thank you, Menzi. Thank you, Prolific. Thank you, Lakedra, Mike M. This is the one who connected us, actually. Thank you, Farah. Thank you, everybody actually that who just got in and contributed and made this talk a success. We're going to upload this on our IGTV, so you can go back and recap, and we can always, talk about more issues later on. So follow this page, and then we can continue letting each other know what else is coming next. Tomorrow we have a second topic that is going to continue around these issues. So keep logged on, and you'll get everything. So thank you so much, Jessica.
Thank you, Ritah, and thank you everyone. I appreciate it.
All right. Yeah. Of course. All right. So
peace, love, and light to you.